Welcome to the latest Paper Street Pictures Roundtable, where we are going to be chatting all things MAXXXINE. My name is Becky Sayers. I am one half of the Paper Street podcast, an indie filmmaker, and just an all-around horror nerd. And I'm here with a bunch of other nerds too. We're joined by Emily Bennett, a writer, director, actress who can probably do just about anything. Her debut feature film, Alone with You, is currently streaming on Shudder, and she's now in post on her second feature film, which includes Larry Fessenden in the cast, very topical for today's conversation. Both of these films were co-written, co-directed by Justin Brooks, a talented cinematographer who just so happens to be Emily's husband. Emily is repped as a screenwriter and director by Spectre Vision. Happy to talk to you again, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
We have another actor among us, if you couldn't tell by the presentation, Chase Williamson. He's also a multi-hyphenate, as he is a film producer as well. You might have seen Chase in John Dies at the End, The Guest, Beyond the Gates, Victor Crowley, and of course, a few Paper Street projects, including Camera Obscura and Scare Package. Thanks for appearing in yet another Paper Street venture, Chase.
I just can't stop being in movies.
And finally, we have Brad McHargue. Brad is a talented writer, having written both for the screen and for several popular horror sites like Bloody Disgusting and Dread Central. Brad is also a host at the Telluride Horror Show, one of the best genre film festivals around, and co-hosts a monthly horror-themed trivia, Friday in Denver. But Brad's biggest accomplishment is surviving under the same roof with me and my wonderfully chaotic daughter. So thanks for joining me from across the hallway, Brad.
Thank you for having me, Becky.
All right, so before we dive into MAXXXINE specifically, I kind of want to take a temperature check on where you all sit with Pearl and X. Are you fans of Pearl and X? Liked one more than the other? Emily, let's start with you.
When X came out, I I loved it so much I couldn't sit still. I adore that movie. I adore it from the first shot, the reveal of the cops on the farm, and like, what are we doing? The slow creep into the house, the TV on. I was like, this is Texas Chainsaw. This is so good. And now we're with indie porn filmmakers, and the love of that ensemble, like the way that Ty treated that ensemble was just so beautiful to me. And when I mean, when she starts singing Landslide, I was just like, I love these people. They're kooky, they're weird. I don't know if we can curse on this, but they're super weird. Was that a thumbs up?
Yeah, you can curse.
Oh, okay. They're fucking weird. They're like exactly like all of my indie filmmaker friends. And it felt like a love letter to indie filmmaking in a way. And then of course the gore was just so beautiful. I love the elderly sex in it. Like you never get to see that. And I just think it was so shocking and so fun that X for me is my favorite of all of them, I think. And then Pearl was a beautiful character piece, but man, I love X.
It's funny because Brad and I were just saying we hadn't met somebody yet that liked X more than Pearl. I love them both, but
Wow.
Pearl seems to be a big fan favorite. So I love that you just challenged our assumption that most people would say Pearl was their favorite.
I'm always being difficult, so
Defying expectations.
Here for it. How about you, Chase?
I'm kind of a basic bitch, so I kind of like Pearl the best. But I do love X a lot. Like I agree with you about everything that you just said. Like I feel like I like X more than most of the people I talk to about who their favorite is, and kind of it's a toss-up more for me. But I love Pearl. I just have never seen anything. I mean, I've seen a lot like Pearl, but not of this contemporary like era. I don't know. I just thought it's so gorgeous, and her performance is so wild. And I love I don't know, I love Pearl. Love Pearl, but I love X.
I think Brad's a basic bitch as well and prefers Pearl too, correct?
I'm a basic bitch
For my
for a lot of
sister.
reasons, but yeah, Pearl. I mean, it's a beautiful character study, and Mia Goth's performance is absolutely incredible throughout. I really, really liked X. I've only seen both of them once, and I remember being a little, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? I definitely preferred the second half of X to the first half when stuff really starts to get going.
Mm.
But I still very much love X. It just Pearl definitely kind of squeaks by from the character standpoint as being my preferred.
I think both films really stand alone super well, and that's what's super interesting about this whole trilogy, right? Is that they could all kind of almost exist in their own identity, and you don't need the other films, which I think is really a cool thing. I am more of a slasher fan, so part of me loves X more, but I think the ending of Pearl just sold me because that performance and that one single take at the end is kind of an all-timer horror performance for me. So I think maybe I need to revisit them, and I'll probably go back and forth over the years around going between Pearl and X. So thinking about going back to Maxine then, maybe what were some of your expectations going into Maxine from having seen Pearl and X? And as a secondary question to that, maybe did it surprise you? Did it meet your expectations? We'll go reverse order this time and start with Brad.
Yeah, I don't know if I had any expectations because to your point, like Becca, what you said, all three of them are just very unique and kind of exist. They can exist in a vacuum in a way, as a result. But yeah, I had no expectations going in beyond, the chatter of people who have already seen it. So like, oh, okay, so this is how the reception and so on. Overall, it's one of those weird movies where I had a lot of problems with it. Like I could spend an hour talking about, the various concerns that I had, either from a script standpoint or a performance standpoint or story standpoint. But I was never bored, and I was genuinely entertained throughout. And it's weird to be able to kind of say that about one movie where it's like, oh yeah, it had a host of problems, but actually I really, really liked it. Um, so yeah, very excited to see how it ends up playing out. Through the rest of its life cycle, like in theaters and whatnot, and more as more reviews come in, but also the potential for a fourth that Ty West has mentioned, and where he plans on going with that.
How about you, Chase?
Um, well, I didn't really know what to expect because I mean, I went into X feeling like I knew what I was getting into, and then it kind of way surpassed my expectations. Pearl, I didn't know what to expect, and then I was like, wow, I didn't know if I would like this at all, and it's like incredible. Maxine, I knew it was gonna be good because the other two were good, and like I would enjoy it and be fun, but I wasn't sure what the vibe exactly was gonna be or what the references were gonna be. I knew there was like a Jalo component. But I mean, I thought it was really, really fun. It was like breezier than the other two in a way. It was sort of just like a fun ride. And I liked sort of like, I feel like he really found the pocket of this like 80s vibe that's not Amblin, that like we've seen the 80s stuff like come back so much, but this was like more in the pocket of like a dirty video store vibe, which was like really fun to see and be in for that experience. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it really like stuck with me in the same way as the other two yet. I just saw it a couple days ago. So I don't know. It's probably like third for me right now, but I still thought it was really fun and a sweet gift to us all.
And Emily, are you feeling similar to Brad and Chase, or are you gonna throw a wrench and be different again?
Just gonna be different just to be different.
Classic.
No. No, I basically agree. I think the way that he's approached all of these films, I knew this was going to feel totally different, and that X exists in its own cinematic world in a way. Like he was like exploitation 70s, go, you know? And then with Pearl, instead of it's set in the 1919s, I think, but we're swept into this like Technicolor Wizard of Oz kind of vibe, which is so beautiful and so singular to that film. And going into this, I knew to expect 80s. I didn't exactly know what it would be, but I was like, it's going to be irreverent. There's going to be lots of blood. There's Giallo, like references here with the black glove. As soon as I saw some of the cast list, I was like, okay, they're dying immediately. They're dying immediately. This one's probably going to stick around. Like, who's Kevin Bacon in this? I tried to not watch too many trailers going in because I like to go in as blind as I can. But I knew to expect like needle drops. I knew to expect style, neon lights, and then, hopefully buckets of blood. So I got all of that. And I think it's interesting because it felt to me less like a horror film and more, yes, De Palma, but it really felt like Ken Russell's Crimes of Passion to me. And like those more kind of, this wasn't like a sexual thriller by any means, but there was that kind of spice to it. And there was that crime aspect to it. So it felt kind of more like a crime thriller with some good blood and some good kills. And I had fun. I don't know that I'll remember it as well as some of the other films, to be honest, but as a piece of cinema with like an obviously bigger budget, I had fun sitting in the dark movie theater during a hot day. And I was like, cool, that was great. So yeah.
Yeah, the summer vibes were there for sure.
Yeah.
I think Chase and Emily perfectly segued into the next topic I wanted to get into, which was that 80s vibe. And like we talked about with Pearl and X, they are all little time capsules of films, representing different cinema aesthetics of their eras. Do you think MAXXXINE was as effective with its sound and aesthetic choices and kind of capturing that era? Let's go with Chase.
Yeah, I think so, in a way that is like specific and singular, like for the movie, which I think is impressive because I feel like we've seen so many 80s throwbacks and stuff in the recent past. I feel like it was still, he found a way to make it really specific to, it felt really like the 80s version of the world from X. Like it's like very detailed and like rich with references that aren't necessarily like, like pink and purple neon lights and like, Depeche Mode. It was like I kind of got the vibe of like LA when the Night Stalker was out, and I kind of expected there to be more of a through line with the Night Stalker thing because it kind of came up and then went away. But I was talking to someone who had seen it before I saw it, and they were like, I knew who the killer was immediately. And I was like, isn't it Richard Ramirez? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh. So I'm a big true crime guy. So I was kind of like, I wonder what they're going to do with the whole Night Stalker thing that they're weaving in there. But I like that it was just sort of in the background and sort of coloring the vibe and sort of the tension in the background. And then I don't know, it just made it, yeah, it made LA feel different than I've seen it presented before. Except for maybe in like some movies from the 80s. Like I need to watch that Ken Russell movie. That sounds really good. I've never seen it.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Wrote it down. I can't wait.
Yeah, how about go ahead.
No, that film is it's so fun. And actually Anthony Perkins from Psycho plays this crazy character in Crimes of Passion. So like if you haven't seen it, it is such a bizarre film, and I love that film. Yeah, highly recommend. And even I think even the title of Crimes of Passion is the way the font appears for the credits kind of throughout this film. So yeah, I really like that. And sorry, Becky, what was like your exact question again?
Yeah, it was more about, do you think it was as effective in Pearl and X in kind of capturing the aesthetics and sound, of its era?
Totally. I think to piggyback on what Chase just said, it it does show the 80s in LA differently than I'm used to seeing, especially nowadays. But I think that's because this film is trying to show what 80s films felt like rather than trying to do real gritty LA in the 80s, if that makes sense. Like it feels like we're in an 80s movie rather than a movie set in the 80s, if that makes sense.
Totally.
It does. It's kind of an interesting towing the line between like kind of hyper stylized, but not hyper stylized in the Stranger Things sort of way, where it's pop 80s. It's more gritty. I'm in a gritty 80s crime thriller where Charles Bronson is going to pop out and gun
Yeah.
down someone on the street.
No, totally. And I think, there's a bit of camp in there. I think, I don't know, but the style choices, I really enjoyed that though. I really enjoyed like the shoes and the production design and the VHS and like Moses with his glasses, like that choice of like glasses that he wears in the video store. I was just like, those are so cool. But these are all like, even when I was sitting there watching the movie, I was like, should I go as Maxine for Halloween? Like that could be an easy. And the answer is yes, because like you could go as any of these characters for Halloween. They're pretty iconic in that way. Whereas I think, and Ty really did that with kind of all three of these films. You can be like, well, I'm going to go as her for Halloween. You could go as Maxine from X. You could go as Pearl, and then people are going to go as Maxine this Halloween. So I probably won't, because I have to be different. But
Oh.
no, but it's like this. This was like a movie 80s, and so yeah, I just felt kind of swept away into that.
Full disclosure, I did go as Pearl as Halloween.
Yay!
Last
I
year,
thought
the
you were
year
gonna say
before.
full disclosure, I have not seen Maxine.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were gonna say.
Oh no. I'm unqualified then.
It's really interesting to hear you all say this because I have not seen the film.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Brad, how about you?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this like on the drive home after seeing the movie, where I think I agree with you, Emily, on that. It feels like a movie from the 80s, and I'm probably the only person who thinks this, where I felt like the first two were fairly organically set in their time periods. Like I wasn't thinking throughout the movie, oh, he's trying to ape Texas Chainsaw Massacre in some way, shape, or form, like stylistically, or the I haven't seen really many movies from the 20s or 30s or 40s, so but with Pearl, it all felt very organic to the setting, whereas with this one, for me at least, I felt it was more style over substance. Um, it felt like it was just trying a little too hard to be in 80s movies. And to your point, Emily, yes, it worked in the sense that it felt like an 80s movie, but I don't think the script worked with it in some way. There's nagging thoughts throughout the back of my head while watching it, where I just every once in a while a little voice would pop in with like, we get it, it's the 80s. And just kind of like hammering home a lot of these references and the settings and whatnot, which is again fine. It just kind of bugged me. But overall, it definitely portrayed the vibe very well. I mean, growing up, I was one of those people who always thought like my experience with like New York and Chicago was colored by film. So I always kind of envisioned these areas as like you don't want to live there. There's crime everywhere and everything is rampant. And I've been to LA maybe once. So, and I was, just a kid in the 80s. So like, I don't know. It didn't have that organic feeling, I think is just the point I'm trying to make there as the other two did, but it wasn't so egregious that it like made me dislike the film.
I think that makes a lot of sense too. And I mean, the 80s ultimately is the era of excess too. So everything is very kind of in your face. But I can totally appreciate and see what you're saying there. Now I'm gonna make you say something positive though, Brad. What was your favorite bit of 80s nostalgia? Even if you didn't like all of, the in-your-face needle drops and whatnot, but whether it's like an aesthetic choice, or a set dressing, or something, what
Yeah.
was your favorite bit?
I really like the video store sequences. I mean, there weren't many of them, but I don't know, I really love the vibe of 80s video stores, even, early mid 90s video stores. So that was probably my favorite. And again, some of the music needle drops, I couldn't name any of them off the top of my head right now, but I remember while watching it to being like, yeah, that's pretty badass.
Emily, how about you? You mentioned a few of them already, I think, but
I know I'm skipping ahead. I like my favorite 80s stuff. I loved when she's just walking by at night, like a bunch of stores, and you pass by like a karate studio, and people are just doing karate in the background for like at night for no reason. Um, I kind of loved that. Like it reminded me of like Karate Kid, and like I felt like there were little kind of nods here and there. Um, and I really enjoyed that. I mean, I loved Betty Davis Eyes. I thought that was like a fun needle drop, especially at the end to tie back to the quote in the beginning. Um, Honestly, I just think those glasses are like my favorite thing that he wears in the video store. That and the fact that he has a cast that we never know why he has a cast. Right? Do
Yeah.
we just assume he like got it skateboarding, I guess, but
yeah.
and maybe there was a cut scene. I thought he was gonna get like I thought that was gonna be part of like a fight sequence or something, but
Have we ever
I don't
seen
know.
a movie before where someone got stabbed in a cast?
It happens in MAXXXINE, doesn't it?
That's
Yeah,
what I
he
mean.
blocks
Yeah.
it with the
Oh, he
yeah.
does. Shoot.
Mhm.
Yeah,
must
I
it
thought
is
that was an
blanked.
brief.
image
It
that I'd
it
never
doesn't
seen.
help him out though at the
No, it's
in
gonna
the
take
end,
even
but
longer to heal.
Yeah. No, I must have blinked during that. I was just like, oh, I must have like looked down, of course. Um, okay, well, good. I'm glad he used that. Yeah, no, I agree with Brad. I think the video store. I mean, I'm a kid who grew up in video stores, so that I could smell it. I was just like, and maybe that's like he's got like adult films, so maybe I don't want to like be in that section too long, but um I just remember like me growing up like finding Hellraiser for the first time, like that cover, that feeling and that excitement. And I'm from the Bible Belt, so I was raised like do not look at those movies. And I just remember like the excitement of like being in a video store like at night was just so fun. So that was probably my favorite thing.
Yeah, I love the video store. I feel like the video store kind of tied it all together for me a little bit. It was like the home base of the movie or something. But I
Yeah.
also love her giant cookie jar of cocaine.
Oh, that
Um,
was
The goose.
yeah,
Yeah.
I really loved that. It really took me back to being on set.
I was like, she makes a lot of money.
yeah.
Yeah, ooh, her cocaine was real cheap.
Good Lord.
Yeah, I can't do that anymore with all the fentanyl. Um, but yeah, I agree about the movie store and obviously the cocaine. I don't do cocaine anymore.
For the record, full disclosure, you have seen MAXXXINE, but you haven't done cocaine.
Never this year.
I think and Emily called this out a little bit. The font choice was probably, this is a nerdy thing, but that was one of my favorite bits, the cursive font. We don't get enough cursive font anymore because it's readability is sometimes a challenge with those fonts, but I just loved it as kind of like a nerd that's into I'll spend a long time deciding on fonts for things. So it's
Same.
hard sometimes to imitate that without doing the most 80s referential stuff is like the very Stranger Things-esque. I'm going to reference that again because it's kind of now become the, predominant visualization of the 80s for a lot of people, like the serify sort of fonts, but there was a lot of cursive, especially in the crime thrillers. So I loved that.
Yeah, especially kids these days, they don't even learn cursive. They can't even read cursive.
Yeah, so they were really confused during the credits of MAXXXINE.
Yeah, they can read anything now. They don't listen that.
There's no cursive on TikTok, so
None.
Let's-
there might be. I don't know.
I want to dive into a little bit more about what a few of you mentioned, which is that this feels more like crime thriller, leaning kind of like in a lot of the language of an erotic thriller, even if the plot doesn't quite translate to that. And obviously with the Giallo references, with the black gloves and the hat with the killer, and this sort of disembodied point of view. I think as horror fans, we all read that language, but it was definitely less of a horror movie than I was expecting. Except when the kills came on, then I was like, oh, here we go. Here we get some like slasher violence. Did you appreciate the mashup? I think we all kind of appreciated seeing a different, like nostalgic throwback 80s film than we're used to seeing. But did you feel like that mashup worked for this story?
It's interesting because she's become sort of like this superhero figure. So like you're wanting it to be like a horror movie, you have like the crime thriller aspect, but then also there's this sort of like anti-hero, like revenge fantasy vibe of like I want to see her crush this man's scrotum in an alleyway, and it makes me really happy. So like I almost kind of wish that there had been like maybe another character who we could have like followed, that we could have been a little bit more like worried for or something, to like make it more horror in a way where like Halsey was dead within like 45 seconds of being in the movie. So like the stakes didn't feel super high in terms of like the tension and like whether I thought like something bad was going to happen. It was more just like, what is she going to do next? Which I love. But like, I don't know. I feel like in X, you obviously don't know who's going to die. People are in danger. Pearl is just sort of like this weird thing where you don't know where it's going. And this was sort of like, all right, what's she going to get herself into? How's she going to get herself out of it? And like, who are we going to meet along the way? But I didn't mind it, but it didn't feel like really like, maybe that's why it didn't stick with me as much. Because I didn't feel as like sort of on edge or really like anything super unexpected was happening.
It reminds me of what you told me, Becky, after saying it, where stuff just sort of happens.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of a collection of scenes leading up to the reveal rather than a straight like. I'm agreeing with you basically. What I'm saying, Becky, is where and to your point, Chase, where like stuff just tends to happen, and I feel like there maybe is a gap. So this takes place in '85, right? And
Yeah.
79 is when the X took place. So there's an entire 6 years where we know she became a porn star and a very, very popular porn star, but there's elements of her personality that I think led to being able to just do so much, it's seemingly random stuff happening. Like to your point, Chase, Halsey's gone in like 45 seconds, and then her other friend dies and all of that. And her reaction is just sort of like, okay.
Yeah.
Like
it's very detached, right? Because
exactly.
we don't spend time with the characters. We don't see her bonding with these characters very much, and we don't really get to feel their loss.
Yeah, and we know she has PTSD, but it's like, told primarily through like those little bits of flashbacks and those quick moments, which just kind of bugged me because throughout the entire movie, I really couldn't get a read on what she was actually thinking as a character. Like, is she worried about this coming to light? Is she worried about dying? Is she worried about her friends? And it just kind of bugged me.
Yeah.
So
I feel like even when Moses Sumney died, like that shot of her like trying to run over to the gurney or what, I didn't really buy that. Like I didn't really see them like I saw them spend time together, but I did like and even the way it was being played, it was very restrained, but she was also like trying to get over to the stretch. I don't know. I was kind of just like,
that moment was also just kind of weird because A, I would imagine, given that that's the video store and it apparently has one person working there, somebody being rolled out in a body bag. You think she would put the clues together based on everything that's happened up until that point. But also, like, I understand that the two detectives were trying to like goad her into helping, but him just like pulling back the thing in front of this massive crowd, and then all of a sudden she freaks out. Just felt so.
surprise, it's
It was
him.
like, oh, dead
That's how
body.
it worked in the 80s. That's how it worked. There was no
Can I
other way
also
to do
just
it.
say before I forget, Michelle Monaghan, I always think is so boring. But she was having the time of her life. And I was like, yes, Michelle. I
I
love what you're
love
doing here.
Michelle Monaghan. I think she's
Oh,
fantastic.
she
I
puts me
thought,
right to sleep.
but this was a very different version of her. I
She
agree.
was just like having so much fun, and I was like, yes, I want to see you have so much more fun.
I want to hear Emily's take on this
Sorry,
because I
yeah.
bet it's going to be different.
Um, always got to be different, right? Did the mashup work for me? Right, that was
Yeah.
the
Yeah. And I
no,
guess we're kind of also getting into Maxine's character a bit. So feel free to jump into either.
oh, for sure. Well, I think the way she was depicted is kind of a lot of the ways that 80s female characters were kind of, well, maybe not though. She did feel, Chase, I like what you say. She did feel a little like superhero-y in a way. She felt a bit untouchable, I think, after the Buster Keaton scene, which is really the crowning achievement of the gore in the film, I think. Um, good Lord, that just heel coming down on those testicles was pretty great. But yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I never was afraid for her. I was like, oh no, she's gonna get caught. Like I was like, she's gonna survive. Like I know she's gonna survive. Um, we're just gonna meet a cast of characters and see a lot of them like off, along the way, much like Friday the 13th or something, which also stars Kevin Bacon. We're kind of seeing people who are fucking around and finding out in one way or another, I guess. Except for Moses, poor Moses. He's just trying to watch a movie. I know, he was so great. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I find it interesting that when Ty West has talked about this movie, he hasn't mentioned a ton of horror films in reference to this film aside from Giallo. With the Black Glove, I do wonder because he's really referencing De Palma, and here I get a lot of, I'm a huge fan of erotic thrillers, and this does have some of that language, without like really crazy sex scenes, but it gave me a lot of Basic Instinct vibes, which isn't from that time period, but it's kind of in that same beat, that kind of like, okay, here we go, and we're gonna find that in the act 2 turn here. And yeah, I think the mashup felt cinematic and also a little convoluted for me. Now I enjoyed it. I was like, oh, he's taking that's interesting. And I felt like I was just watching a massive movie fan, just being like, here we go. I'm gonna put this in, I'm gonna put this little thing, the black glove. You could have easily done that Michael Myers style. You could have easily like not seen a thing, really. And the black glove, sure, we can put that in because it is a horror reference, but yeah, I don't know. I understand why they marketed this as a horror film because you're going to get a bigger audience for that for sure. This really does feel like a crime thriller to me, in the 80s where you know, when people die, you're just like, oh, oh well. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't actually
Yes.
matter if anyone
Right. They're
dies.
just fodder, right? And
They're blood bags. Yeah.
exactly. It's interesting. I think something that's kind of crystallized for me hearing you all talk is thinking about Maxine's character and these genre mashups. It's kind of hard because we don't really have a template for this as a film goer, which is why maybe I will feel differently about this movie over time. Now that I've seen it and know that it's maybe not any one of the things that I imagined it would be. But Maxine is kind of part final girl, part like vengeful hero, part femme fatale, you know, from the erotic thrillers. Like she's kind of all these things. And I think we're not used to seeing women characters kind of with all of those sort of features mashed together. Usually we get much more archetypal versions of those, right? Where usually the femme fatale is not the hero of the story, or the final girl is not a porn star also, right? So we get all these different kind of versions of the character we're supposed to expect. So I think that's something that I just thought of hearing you all. And I think that's actually kind of a really interesting way of looking at this in the same way that Pearl was a character study. Maybe Maxine is a character study and we just don't, it's so glossy and beautiful. We're like focusing on the action, but maybe there's something more going on there underneath that we just don't have a template for yet.
Becky, I just want to say I totally agree with that. And I think I think it's interesting and I like that in modern cinema we're kind of moving towards these not fully like virginal or whatever main female characters. Like that's wonderful. Thank God. Like keep that. I just wanted to know that she was in danger. I just really wanted to feel like she was in danger. And I think that's the only, because I love all the badassery. I was just like, oh, her dad. And honestly, like from the opening shot, I think Chase, you said it too. I was just like, oh, the killer's her dad. Like, I was just like, oh, satanic panic. It's going to be like the opposite of satanic panic. Cool, cool, cool. But I was fine with that. I usually don't care about spoilers. I like the journey of a film. If you tell me a spoiler, I'm still going to watch the movie. But I love all of that about her character. And even with Pearl, like talk about Pearl, even though there's not like an immediate danger there, I know how much she wanted that role. Like I know how much and I'm an actor. I'm just like, oh girl, I get it. Like I understand needing to get that role and not getting it. And I felt so crushed for her and so complicated and how sexually and violently complicated she was. But I was more afraid that Pearl wasn't going to get the role than I was for Maxine to survive this, I think.
Oh, no.
And that's a really interesting study of like stakes and what is that? And yeah, I just think that was really interesting what you said, Becky. So I just wanted to kind of think that out loud.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that too, around the stakes. And I think Chase brought up stakes earlier as well. We just don't, we're like, I felt detached from a lot of the things that were happening because of that, because the stakes weren't set up. It was really hard to get a sense of what was in Maxine's head. And I think one of my favorite moments was when she was getting her face, the head cast done. And you just see that dripping down her face. And it was a really great way of showcasing kind of the sort of suffocating past and the trauma and her suddenly having a panic attack. And that is the most vulnerable I think we ever see her in the film. And I wish there was more of that.
Totally agree. That was like, now that you bring that up, that was such a good scene.
Yeah,
just that slow dolly. Yeah, the slow dolly. And Chase, I don't know if you have had a face cast like that ever.
Yeah, but I
as an
had a
actor.
much different experience. I thought it was like a spa treatment. I loved it.
Did you?
You psycho. They're
Yeah,
horrifying.
they were playing Deep Blue Sea, and I was like listening to it in the plaster, and it was like being
Uh-huh.
under the water watching Deep Blue Sea.
Oh my gosh.
Nice.
Oh, that's amazing. I did you have I've never actually had it. I've had many parts of me cast before, but never my face. There's some yeah. Anyway, but don't you usually have like straws?
Yeah, I didn't have
Yeah, I was like,
transfusion or anything.
Yeah.
That would have obviously been terrifying. But yeah, no, there were straws, and I think I even had like a mouth hole of some like a little opening or something. But
yeah,
I thought it was very relaxing.
I
You're the
love
only
that.
person I've ever met that has said that. I've done it once
Really?
and I could not wait for it to be over. It was
Yeah,
so
I don't
hard
know.
not to panic.
I have no claustrophobia. I like being sort of like I like being in
Oh,
the back seat of the car. I hate heights, but I'm like not, I don't have a problem with like small spaces or
So
at
getting
all.
an MRI is just a trip for you. It's like, yeah,
Oh, it's a
give me the
treat for
headphones.
me. A real treat. Yeah.
Like a hug.
Yeah, keep them coming. More MRIs, please.
love it. Um, Earlier, Emily, you mentioned the quote from Betty Davis. It was, "In this business, until you're known as a monster, you're not a star," which is how, the film opens. And so that seems to be referring to Maxine. Um, but kind of going back and like how we're talking about maybe some of the things we wanted from this character and didn't necessarily get on screen. Um, do you feel like we effectively see her as a monster? Like in the same way, do you think that quote actually comes to fruition, or maybe you have a different interpretation of what that quote meant in context of the film? How about you,
I mean,
Brad? Or oh
Oh,
no, go ahead, Emily.
oh no. Brad, I've talked enough lately.
oh, yeah, I've been actually been thinking about it, and that's a really good question. And I think a lot of it really kind of comes down to I wanted to see the 6 years that happened before this because she's not a monster unless you are of the variety that because she's in porn, she's a monster, et cetera, which I don't think that was the point of that. It's just she underwent a very traumatic experience that obviously no one ever said anything about. So she's harboring those deep secrets and whatnot. But kind of like tying to the whole idea of her almost becoming a vigilante and stuff like that. Like none of this makes her a monster. She's not a bad person. She's hiding a lot of things. And obviously that informs her character and whatnot. But no, I don't maybe I'm missing something, but I didn't see that at all. But again, I also feel like there's just some stuff missing about her past that I think would have informed the character a bit more. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, like thinking about that quote and how it could apply. But I feel like the only way it really applies is like if the Betty Davis quote is like, you become a monster in the eyes of like the satanic panic people, and that's like gets your name out there more. Like she's not like, but it is kind of confusing because she's not like that complicated in terms of like whether or not she's morally like as an audience member like in
Mhm.
the right or the wrong or whatever. But I guess it pertains more to like the idea of fame and all these people have to get her because she was a porn star and they have problems with it, so she's a monster. But I feel like, it could have been a little bit, there could have been a little bit more to that if it had been more of a character study or something.
It would have been more relevant, I think. And again, not to beat this horse to death, leading up to it, we see her transition from almost a Pearl-like character, someone who will do anything to get what she wants. Because she's going to be a star and all that jazz. But and her being the monster would be like, she's going to kill people who get in her way. But it's like, no, at this point, she's literally just going after people who are trying to kill her. So, or do harm to her in some way, which does not make her inherently a monster. So, yeah, it didn't work for me.
Yeah.
I think the quote, it's interesting to think of the quote as a horror audience member because when we think of monster, we think of killer, crazy, metaphorical things. We're in the horror space. Whereas when Betty Davis says it, I guess when you look at it with the focus of like older Hollywood in a way, you do to get those headlines, to get ahead, it's more of like an ambition monster, it seems, than an actual like Babadook or any horror monster that we might come across. And so in a way that quote speaks to me. Was it Mae West or someone who like did a show on Broadway and got arrested because they told her to not put it on because there was nudity in it, and they were like, if you do one more show, you're gonna get arrested, you're gonna be a monster. And then she was like, screw you guys, and like got her. And I'm not sure if it was her, but it was in that time period. So when Betty Davis is saying that, I mean, we all know her feud with Joan Crawford and you know, the kind of drama that happened then, but they were always in the headlines. Like they were made famous by not being agreeable, nice women. You know, they were like, get the fuck out of my way. This is my set. You know what I mean? So in a way, that quote seems to relate less to me as a horror audience and more towards that older Hollywood idea of get out of my way in a more like All About Eve kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the director in the film, Elizabeth Bender, played by Elizabeth Debicki, also kind of reinforces that, where she's also kind of this unforgiving woman who has become successful in a era that was very hard to succeed as a director of horror films, let alone anything else as a woman. So maybe that's reinforcing that. I also interpreted some of MAXXXINE, you know, it requires her to be ruthless to succeed. And I think part of it is also her not helping the police and turning a blind eye to people dying around her, maybe part of that monster play where she's choosing fame over other people's well-being. And it isn't until the end that she actually decides to take action. But at that point, you're like, is she doing it for herself? Or is she doing this because, you know, she doesn't want other people to get hurt? I'm not entirely sure. I'm convinced she did one or the other, but I think they definitely were playing with the idea of her doing, not being willing to sacrifice, you know, anything if it got in the way of her goals, including like other people getting chopped up.
That's really well put. I think, yeah, I saw this quote recently. I can't remember where I'm seeing anything lately. Where there was a quote, I read it in some periodical that was talking about women now having the ability to be art monsters now that we're kind of not expected to be housewives. And I kind of loved that phrase, art monster. I really loved that. I was like, yeah, I want to be an art monster. That's great. I want to live in that. That sounds so fun. And you're exactly right. It's like she will not accept a life she doesn't deserve. She will do literally anything. She will step over the bodies of her friends, who maybe they're not that close anyway, who knows? But she she will not help the cops, she will not help solve these murders because she needs to be famous. And I think that's a really interesting character trajectory. That's Lady Macbeth. That's so many, you know, classic characters that are so delightful for women to play, because ambition is such a really interesting thing, especially as an actress, a woman, for me to be able to delve into, because we see ambition in so many, like, I'm a Shakespeare nerd, so like all of the Shakespearean like history plays, we see that ambition in a masculine way all the time. And so to see that ambition in this female way is really interesting. Again, I think you can totally do that. I love seeing ambitious women. I just want to feel like she's in danger. That's the only thing missing from it, honestly. And like, I love that opening shot of her coming in and just like sitting down, and she's just like, what? And I was just like, man, I wish I could walk into an audition like that sometimes. That would be great. Like
Yeah.
wearing that exact top, just being like, yo, give me that role. I mean, that is
Yeah.
enviable for me to see. And I'm just like, oh, I want to be her. And yeah, that again, that quote though speaks to like, what does it take to be her? And maybe it takes having no empathy for anyone but your career.
Yeah, that line when she kind of does a little hair flip, like, oh, I know the lines, is one of my favorite moments, line deliveries in the whole film. Because it does exude that confidence. Because you can tell that was maybe said in a way that was like they were not expecting much from her, and she knew it, and she wanted to say, like, I'm not who you think I am, I can do this. And I loved that moment.
Totally.
I definitely think that. So like I agree with all of that, but I don't think it supports the story that we were given. Because she gets the opening, she gets a job, and she wants to be a star. It's like, okay, it's been clear that through the trailers and everything, nothing's going to get in her way from being a star. Then she gets his job, and then yes, a bunch of stuff gets in her way. The Kevin Bacon's character and obviously everything else. But I feel like it would have packed a much stronger punch if the story focused more on her goal to become a star rather than, oh, a bunch of external things are happening to me based on something that happened 6 years ago. And now I have to survive all of that. And that's where it ties in, Emily, with what you were saying about you wanted to actually feel afraid for her, making her almost like, and the probably isn't the best reference, but something like The Devil's Rejects, where your protagonists are just the most awful people in the world. Like they're not good people. In this case, you don't make her a good person. Right now, she's, I think, a little morally ambiguous throughout. But if her whole job is like, if her whole goal is to become this huge star, then the roadblocks should be more internal than external. And yet you could still tie in the satanic panic thing, and someone's trying to sabotage the creation of the film or something like that. And it just feels like all of that went to the side. Yes, she was so ruthless, and she ended, crushes a guy in the car thing, which I thought was an awesome scene. But all of that stuff did not fit what I thought her character was throughout the movie. Because she has does nothing. Like when she messes up, and Vicky's character is all, you need to be on point, you need to do all this stuff. And she's like, yes, I will. Would have, I feel like, packed a stronger punch if, that almost like just reinforced her to violently dispatch everything that is getting in her way internally rather than just, oh, I have to do it to survive. Does any of that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I think to jump on what you're saying, and I wonder if there was a scene that was cut, because again, going back to what Becky said, that internal struggle of like the dolly shot, just a dolly shot towards someone with like a bunch of goo on their face. One of the most riveting moments dramatically in the film for me, because I was like, oh, okay. But I wonder if there was a scene where she was doing a scene work with Elizabeth Debicki's character, maybe that of course would have tie-ins thematically in the larger picture of MAXXXINE, where she could really dig into an emotional moment that suddenly turns real for her, and that could have been a really interesting exploration, exactly what you're saying, Brad, to keep it both the internal struggle and the external struggle towards the things, the obstacles that are coming at her. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the way that you put that.
It's almost like, to use the art monster metaphor, we wanted to see her being consumed by her own art monster, like not just these external threats. Like, what is that doing to her? And what kind of choices is she making and struggling with herself. So I totally get that. Want to switch gears a little bit, though all very related. Just talking about moralism and entertainment as a theme, because this is a continuation, right, of themes from Pearl and X. This time it's focusing on the Satanic Panic, censorship debates. There's that great montage in the beginning of the film, with Dee Snider. And a lot of the Christian protests of media that were happening around that time. For me, it felt like a great weaving of all the kind of seeds that were laid from Pearl and X around attitude around pornography and sex and violence and kind of older like code era filmmaking that's kind of like referencing kind of the way that scene they're looking at the porn in Pearl, and she had never seen anything like it. To me, this is kind of bringing all of those themes together and turning it up to 11 in a very in your face sort of way. I'm curious if you felt these themes really coming through just as strongly as I did in MAXXXINE. Start with you, Chase.
Yes, I did. I mean, yeah, it was definitely like it was all tying back together. I understand like where all the threads were coming from. I don't know that it like really moved me or like taught me anything more about like what that meant, or like what that meant for her, or like what that meant for me. But it was fun. I don't know.
How about you, Brad? Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think a lot of people when I've read reviews have described it, it's saying a lot of things without saying anything about it. Where it's
Yeah,
like it's
like
a
I'm not
backdrop
sure
and it
what exactly
exists.
the
But
takeaway is like
yeah,
about what it's trying to say about all of that. But I like that aesthetically it's all there and it's like a fun ride to go out on.
yeah.
No, sort of, I think is my response to that. I feel like obviously the ideas of the Satanic Panic and censorship and all that were all big throughout the 80s, especially with, the Night Stalker and all that stuff. I feel like it was just trying, then this kind of goes back to my idea of it being just style over substance, where it was just trying to shoehorn in so much 80s related stuff that was happening without having enough room for it to breathe. It could have very easily focused on the idea of her being a pornographic film star and how she is treated by other people and she needs to prove herself as a star, rather than tying into the whole idea of the Night Stalker and Satanic Panic. Yes, it's very 80s, but did it really need to be involved there? No, because the Satanic Panic stuff was all just tied into the Night Stalker stuff and the branding, which mostly irrelevant, I think, in the grand scheme of things. You could still have the father not even like he could mention the Satanic Panic, but it didn't need to be such a strong through point. It could really just focus on the idea of the religious fanaticism surrounding the rise of the grime and excess and all of these types of films, pornographic or otherwise. So that kind of bugged me. A lot of it needed more room to breathe in that regard.
How about you, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, when we got to in horror films, we're used to seeing satanic rituals of people around a fire and usually in dark clothing or light clothing. And I enjoyed, I got a little chuckle. I was like, haha, the Christians are, I thought that was kind of fun. And, I can imagine when he was conceiving of the plot of this, I'm sure he was like, we're going to do that in the end. And I kind of enjoyed that. I enjoyed flipping the Richard Ramirez story on its head because he killed in the name of Satan. Classically, I just like re-listened to a whole podcast about that crazy man. And he would brand his victims sometimes. He would always say he was doing things in the name of Satan. and to use that but be like, no, it was her Christian father the whole time. It felt like I got it, and I appreciated it for sure. I don't think it says as much about the moralism um, as something maybe like Videodrome, which I think is interesting, and where that dark channel turns into this epic quest and becoming part of the system itself. And like, I love Videodrome, and I can't begin to take that film apart in like 2 minutes right here. But I think MAXXXINE, I think it's an interesting button to put at the end of this. I don't know that it's saying a ton, but I did enjoy the reverse satanic ritual, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think that anyone was surprised. And maybe that's in the way that I think X and Pearl had these moments that were just like, oh, that's not what I was expecting. Like you said, I did not go into this film expecting to get a full-on love-making scene between an elderly couple, or just had these moments that you were like, oh, I've never seen that in a movie before. Whereas I felt like the ending of MAXXXINE and the reveal with the dad wasn't really much of a reveal, because I think we all kind of knew that at that point, and the twist that it was the Christians all along just felt very expected, and maybe that's why I didn't feel like it was saying anything, because as horror fans, I think it takes a little bit more than that probably to get us to be like, oh, well, that's a statement. So I kind of agree that I didn't necessarily dislike it, but I think I wanted another layer to it, or I just wanted to be surprised as a viewer. And I'm not expecting like a Shyamalan style twist or anything. I just want a conversation or something at the end from the film that I feel like the other films in Ty West filmography really do. Like, they always have a really striking conclusion where you like, I want to talk about that. I did not feel the same way with MAXXXINE. Did you all have a similar thing, or were you like, oh, I can't wait to discuss that ending with someone?
And for me, the ending is just, if it is saying anything, it's just the hypocrisy of the right, or the Christian right from the 80s or something like that. But again, it didn't explore it. It just sort of happens because we don't know much about the father other than the fact that he was an evangelist, preacher, or whatever. I agree with you. I think, again, like when we left, we got outside the theater, we just kind of looked at it and I was like, nah, it's fine.
Yeah, it was definitely a little safer than X or Pearl for sure. So yeah, I didn't come out of it like needing to talk about it, but I had a good time.
Yeah, I think, well, exactly what you guys are saying. I think this was made for like a bigger budget, and probably reaching for a broader audience than they may have known X was going to get, or Pearl. By now maybe they're playing to a bigger audience, so a bit of a more predictable ending was in the cards. And Becky, I don't want to jump on any points that you have to say, but I'm curious like what he would do in the future if he continues this. That could be interesting. And I also had a question for all you guys, because I had to leave like right after my screening. Was there a post-credit sequence or not? Because I've heard different things.
Oh, I don't think so. We didn't stay for the end, but I was under the impression there was not. But
I've heard both.
Huh. I didn't
see but
a fourth.
Well, I think Ty West has said a few different things about this. He said this is his concluding chapter, but that he's not opposed to telling stories in this universe again. And that was actually going to be my last question for you all.
Sorry, Becky.
Oh, no, that you didn't spoil it. Don't worry. Is there anything in particular you want to see him explore in this universe? Whether it's more about Pearl, more about maybe that time in between X and MAXXXINE. You want to see what Maxine does in another 5 years. Another side character. We all loved Leon Moses Sumney's character. Maybe we want a whole thing with him and his other side life that he had going on before the video store. There were some like nods to it. How did he break his arm? I don't know. What do you all want to see from Ty West next?
If he's continuing the story, the other for me would I'd love to see what happened in between X and Maxine. I'd love to see what more Pearl does leading up to her being able to be in X. But if it continued the actual Maxine story, and he still wants to try to have a message of some sort, fast forward more towards aughts-ish area, the rise of the internet. She is now an older actress. She's aging gracefully, but she's now getting pushed out. So what I kind of wanted out of Maxine, just in a different take of it, I guess, could be interesting. Outside of that, it would just be the actual reveal of what happens in X to the things, and I don't know, her almost doing damage control. Shit, and that's how you tie in the whole Betty Davis quote on, like, is she a monster because of this? And then it goes to the internet, or is she a monster for having done what it takes to survive in these extraordinary circumstances? Oh, her, you know, her past history. And so there's a lot that could be done, but I think if it's anything like Maxine in that regard, it's not going to be great unless he like really focuses on just like the one or two points he wants to make rather than trying to have a bunch. So, but I'd also love to see the late 90s, early aughts film side of things kind of captured, because that's where I grew up. So I think that'd be interesting.
Oh my God. That's a great idea, Brad. I'm just like, my mind is spinning now with her becoming like aging with the rise of the internet. But then you also get into like the torture porn era of horror, which could be really interesting if you do a kind of Sunset Boulevard like early aughts, like super gore. If she is starting to age out of this, and then Maxine starts becoming the older version of Pearl. I mean, that's really interesting. She does see her career start to wane because she's getting older, and the hypocrisy of aging Hollywood. You know, we can like focus in on that while really diving into that Betty Davis quote of her truly, you know, becoming the monster, killing the woman who got the role, who's slightly younger than her. And then that could be really interesting.
Or even just continuing the idea of, you know, how to name 5 actresses who got their start in horror films. Fast forward to, you know, modern times, or even like the early aughts again, she can't get out of horror films. She's trying to make her break. So it's just a continuation of her journey to become a star, but she can never reach the heights she wants because A, she was pigeonholed as a porn star. She's now pigeonholed as a horror actress, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I love
it. You can find her at like a con, and she's sitting there like signing things, and she, you know, just slow dolly towards her, just like, I hate this.
Yes.
That's a great film. Guys, can we pitch this to Ty?
Like a Sunset Boulevard Mommy Dearest set in like the 90s, early 2000s with Pearl.
This writes itself.
Yeah. I'm there.
I think we just wrote a hit.
You said it in what, 06 when YouTube hit, 2004 or something like that? I don't know when YouTube actually hit.
You were 6?
2006.
Oh, I thought you said I was 6 when YouTube.
Oh no, I was like,
oh
my God.
I think it was 05. I think it was 05, maybe.
It was 05?
06. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Just graduated college. But no, I mean, there's so much that can be done depending on the direction he would want to go.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think we came up with the ultimate version. Nobody's going to come up with something better than what we just did. Definitely. But no,
guys. Summer 2023 and she's on strike.
Yeah.
And she's going to the different executives. And...
The other thing I think would be kind of fun to do is I kind of want to see the Puritan 2, like the movie they're making. I kind of just want to see that movie. Because I like the themes in it sounded really interesting from the director talking about it, and I was like, oh, I would be down for that, because if he's like, I'm done with the Maxine character and I just don't want to do that anymore, but I'm open to doing things in the world, that's like where my mind went. I'm like, well, maybe there's some other threads there that we could get that are just like filling out this universe in a very meta sort of way. But that's the other thing I kind of want to see.
That'd be pretty cool.
As long as they don't make the
Sure.
Puritan 1 and they just put out the Puritan 2.
Yes, I love it when there's a 2 and there's not a 1. And it's like somebody's trying to find it, and you just make up this whole lore that it's been banned and every copy of it was burned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Physical media, you gotta keep it.
exactly. All right, well, that is the conclusion of our roundtable. Thank you all so much. This was a really fun conversation. I think I feel a little bit differently too about the movie now, having listened to you all talk about it, and it's something I hope to like revisit again and kind of let it marinate a while and see how I feel about it. And for anybody watching that made it, to the end and heard all our brilliant ideas, if you enjoyed this, then please subscribe to the Paper Street Pictures YouTube channel. There's a lot of other roundtables on there. You can also find episodes of the Paper Street podcast as well as on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. And look out for episode 33, where we chatted with Emily and Justin about Alone with You. Awesome film that you should watch. It's a really inspiring listen. But we'll post more links about all our guests below, so you can check out all of their work. And if you thought they were brilliant, which they are, you can maybe follow them on the socials and all that. But that's everything. So thank you all again. And we'll talk again soon, maybe in the future for MAXXXINE 2.0. All right, bye-bye.